Welcome to my online studio. Today we're going to do Rag Yaman for guitarists. Rag Yaman is called the king of ragas in Indian classical music. It's the first one that almost every student learns when they're learning. If you've got an instrument like a guitar with frets and all sorts of limitations, there are things you have to do to try and get around those limitations, and that's what a lot of Indian classical musicians attempt to do on their instruments. So we're going to split this video up into chapters. We'll start off with some very basic stuff and move on to a bit more of the nitty-gritty of ragas. So I hope you stick with me, and we'll see how far we get. So if you've picked up a guitar just recently, or you've only started playing for a while, you'll still probably know a few things that could be really useful. So let's start assuming that you know pretty much just the E minor pentatonic scale, which is using all the notes of the open strings of your guitar, and then the octaves of those notes on the frets. So you end up with this pattern. And I'm also going to assume that you know an F chord, one of the beginner guitarist's favorite chords. But we're not going to have to play it all at once. We're just going to play the notes of that chord one at a time. So we're going to add those two things together. We'll add the E minor pentatonic scale, or the G major pentatonic scale, and the F chord notes. But we're only going to add the F chord notes on the way back down again. So it'll sound like this. They are the notes of Rag Yaman. The root note, or what you could approximate to be a root note, if you're thinking about Indian classical music being in a key, is in this case an F. So if you're playing, say, with a female vocalist like we did at the beginning, they often are singing in A sharp. So using your jazz brain, you'll quickly turn that into a B flat. And let's just start very simply. Let's grab a capo. So it'll be very easy. And I'm going to put the capo one fret lower than the A sharp on the bottom string. So A sharp, B flat is up here on the 6th fret. So I'll put the capo on the 5th fret. And then we'll start that same scale again. But now I'm going to put a drone in the background in A sharp, B flat, so you can hear how these notes sound. We'll do that same thing of E minor pentatonic on the way up and adding in the notes of an F chord on the way back down. And there you have it. That is the notes of Rag Yaman and the notes that you use on the way up and on the way down. You can have an experiment with those notes up and down, see how you go, finding some phrases that you might like, and see how you go. Okay, so if you're still here, you want to learn more. Let's take the capo off. And we'll do those same notes though. We'll stay in B flat. The ascending scale in Hindi is called the aroy. The descending scale is called the avroy. And what we're actually playing in Western terminology here is the 7th, and then the 2nd, the 3, the sharp 4, the 6, the 7. And so we're leaving out the 1 and the 5, which are the main notes of the key center if you're thinking about it in Western music terminology. So it really keeps this sense of tension as you're heading up the scale. And then we finally land on a B flat on the way back down. And now we can play those notes as well. And if you have a look at the two things that we did, that minor pentatonic and the F chord, there's only one note they have in common, and it's this note. It's the major third. It's called ga. So this is sa re ga ma pa da ni sa instead of do re mi fa sol la ti do. And the third note, ga, is the most important note in Rag Yaman. Every raga has a vadi, and a very important note. It's, if you imagine the music as being a movie, then this note would be the main protagonist in that movie. And then there's the samvadi, which is, in this case, ni, the major 7. And it's like the antagonist. It's the if the protagonist was the leading lady, then this would be her arch nemesis or something like that. It's the second most important note. There's lots of phrases that use a movement from the major third, ga, to the major 7, ni. The vadi and the samvadi are a fifth or a fourth apart, almost always. So a fifth up and a fourth down is the same thing. So we've started off playing it in this sort of block position that we often use as guitarists. Using that phrase there. But we don't have to do it that way. Another way that you can approach this is to move up and down the neck. Why don't you try this? Try going up the ascending notes of the scale, which are these ones. Open string. And then instead of just going up linearly like that, slide up to the note above it and then back down. But you're only doing that so you land on the ascending notes. And that'll give this sense of circular movement around the notes as well. So another thing to add is lots of slides, hammer-ons, pull-offs, things that you might do in your normal phrasing, but keeping those ideas in mind of what notes you can use on the way up and on the way down, circling around those notes that are important. If you're still here, you want to know more. What we're doing really is playing a Lydian scale. So if you've been to jazz school and you understand modes, you've probably come across Lydian before. In Indian classical music, it's the scale Kalyan. It's actually a tat, they call it. They are very similar in that they're the same notes if you were to try and put them on the frets. But they're actually not. The notes that are used in the Indian classical system are just intonated. So they're a different microtone compared to what you might find on your guitar. So your guitar is kind of out of tune if you're trying to play Indian classical music. For most of the time, that doesn't really matter. But for the major third in particular, it really does matter. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that if you're really wanting to try and get these notes right, you actually have to bend them a little bit. And in this case of the major third, it's bending downwards, which you, unless you're trying to use a whammy bar, It's better to bend up from below. That brings us on to some other subtleties about Rag Yaman and about Indian classical music that you might want to incorporate into your playing. One of them that is used a lot is symmetry. In this particular case, ni raga and madani are essentially the same phrase, just shifted up by a fifth. And there's lots of times where you move around the 7 or around the 3 in exactly the same way. So you heard me dance around one of them and then the other in a similar way. And so you often have phrases that start on one and end on the other. The notes that we left out on the way up were the 1 and the 5, the sa and ba. So it's not so much that you leave them out, is that if you want to play them, it's kind of like a dead end. So if you're going up and you hit one of these notes, your only option then is to come back down again. You can't keep on heading up because then you get this sort of sound. It becomes very linear and it loses its Yamanness. It loses really what this raga is all about. So instead, if you want to go to that note, then that's the end. You go back down again. You only have to go down one note, then you can keep going up. So lots of different phrases you can do there around this idea of wanting to go up and having to go down first to get there. If you have an electric guitar, you can try bending up to some of these notes. In Indian classical music, you don't use vibrato so much, so it's not something where you can hide the intonation by throwing in your big wide vibrato. So it's much more specific. If you try playing this scale up in groups of 3, groups of 4, and then accent the beginning of each one with a slide or something like that. Then on the way down, you can do the same thing of accenting a slide as you change strings. Just because of the way the notes are laid out on the fretboard, you get a bit of a 3-3-2 grouping. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Which is a nice little rhythmic addition you can add in. So I hope you've got something to add to your guitar playing out of this. If you've got anything that you'd like to learn about, then please let me know in the comments. I'll be making more of these videos coming up, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.